Hi, everyone. This is Nick Burbules. I'm a member of the International Academy of Education. This is another in a series of interviews that we're doing with authors of booklets in the Educational Practices series that is co-sponsored by the International Academy of Education and the International Bureau of Education, which is part of UNESCO. These are short research-based booklets that summarize the empirical research on significant issues in educational policy and practice. Today's guest is Wim Van Dooren, who wrote a book called Proportional Reasoning about math education, with Xenia van Vakusi and Leuven Verschaffel, his co-authors. Looking forward to this conversation with you, Wim. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for hosting me.
Okay, so let's get started here. So let's start at the beginning. What is proportional reasoning? And you call it a capstone concept in mathematics education, a crucial core concept. Can you say more about what proportional reasoning is and why you think it's so important?
Well, I can easily say so. Whenever we're cooking, we are using proportional reasoning. Whenever we're judging chances, we're using proportional reasoning. Whenever we go to the shop or we go to the gas station, we're using proportional reasoning. Basically, it's about reasoning about the relation between quantities. If I cook a recipe for 2 people and I then later on cook the same recipe for 6 people, I need the ingredients multiplied by 3 and so on. So it's reasoning about relations between quantities, which is important. It's important in later life, in physics, in chemistry, biology, in daily life, and so on. And at the same time, it is what we call a capstone, indeed, of elementary arithmetic. It's a kind of skill that typically is being taught at the end of primary education, thinking about ages 10, 12-year-olds, start to reason proportionally, start to learn to do it. And it brings together so many things from their previous arithmetic experience. So they've learned to multiply already, but this is about reasoning about multiplicative relations. And you can use additive, like addition operations and so on, in solving problems there. So a lot of the complexity of mathematical patterns comes together in proportional situations. So that's why it's a capstone, and it's the starting point for so many topics in mathematics and in sciences later on.
That's an excellent summary and introduction. So within the scope of math education, you talk about the significance of proportional reasoning across different grade levels. Starting with something as simple as fractions, but getting into later probability, linear algebra, and other more advanced concepts in mathematics. It doesn't go away. It's as you say, it's a consistent set of issues that emerges in a variety of different mathematics and other contexts.
Absolutely, and it's something that is often overlooked. We see it, well, we call it in our booklet also one of the big ideas of mathematics. And those big ideas are often overlooked in the sense that, well, we will teach certain mathematical topics like probability and so on, while forgetting that this is actually proportional reasoning that children or students have encountered in other domains and so on as well. And students don't often see the connections there, while I think they are there. And if they struggle in one domain, they will struggle in the other domains as well, while they might benefit from seeing those connections.
So I'm not an expert in mathematics education by any means, but you've just raised a sort of interesting issue, which is when you say it's sort of one of the big ideas, is the notion here that once a person has learned the concept of proportional reasoning, let's say relatively young, like, as you say, tripling the amounts of a recipe if you're serving it for 2 people or 6 people, a relatively simple concept. Once they get the concept of proportional reasoning, is it easier for them to understand it and learn it in other contexts? Or does it have to be relearned, in a sense, each time it comes up? Because while it's conceptually similar, it takes on a different character in probability, let's say, or in linear algebra.
It does take up a different shape. So it's a bit too naive to assume that if you learn it early on, it will automatically transfer. That's certainly not the case. But as a teacher, you can have a role in it and you can point it out to students and therefore make the transfer easier. And I think that is important, to not leave it implicit and to refer back explicitly to those occasions. To start on early is I think really necessary, and in our booklet we clearly refer to that. So we explain that young children can already do meaningful things in proportional situations, even when they still struggle, even when they cannot do complex calculations and so on. They can do meaningful things. They can see patterns in there. And starting early, then I said, is good, we think. Even if they're like working with very basic strategies, because they cannot do calculations that are complicated, but they can do quite basic calculations and figure out solutions. So starting early is good, but linking later on to those early insights and so on is a very good thing.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. So one of the points you make in the booklet is that students in learning this concept use a variety of different strategies for achieving the results of proportional reasoning. So let's go back to your recipe example. So you're using, let's say, 2 cups of material for 2 people, and now you have 6 people. So one way to get to that result would be what you call additive, saying, well, I start with 2, then 2 more, then 2 more. Or they could use a multiplicative strategy, saying, well, 3 times as many people, therefore 3 times as much of the raw material. You also talk about learning algorithms. So can you say more about the different kinds of strategies that students learn as or develop as they're trying to learn this concept, and how those different strategies maybe developmentally help students develop a more robust or sophisticated concept of proportional reasoning?
Yeah, sure. There's quite a lot of research on those strategies. And what we see very young children are able to do is, well, the initial point is, let's say, a one-to-many correspondence, which basically boils down to saying, if I make, let's say we're making a cake, and you need 2 eggs for a cake for 1 person. It's very easy. So there's a one-to-many correspondence. Every person's cake has 2 eggs in it. So it's very easy then. These are basic multiplication problems, you can say, that children can do, let's say, in 2nd grade, 6, 7, 8-year-olds, to say for 6 people, you need, well, 2 eggs per person. So it's 6 times 2, it's 12. So that's a very basic one-to-many correspondence, 1 person to 2 eggs. But at some point, you can also say, oh, I already have made a cake for 2 persons and it had 4 eggs. Now I want the cake for 6 persons. So I can make 3 cakes for 2 persons. That's a cake plus another cake plus another cake, which means 2 eggs plus 2 eggs plus 2 eggs is 6 eggs. So you can build up. That's the whole point of this kind of reasoning. So you're then building up, and you're still using addition. You're adding a cake to another cake to another cake, and at the same time you're adding 2 eggs plus 2 eggs plus 2 eggs, and so on. So that's additive reasoning, as we call it. It's a reasoning by addition, while proportions are multiplicative in nature. But that's another step. It's a bit more sophisticated. Still more sophisticated is then saying, oh, I go from 2 persons to 6 persons, so that's 3 times as many persons, so 3 times as many eggs. That's more sophisticated, and then you're reasoning truly multiplicatively. That's typically the next step. But an alternative way of looking at it is saying, I look at not the relation between the persons and then the relation in eggs, but I can say how many eggs per person are being used. So I then go for what we call unit ratio. I try to establish how many eggs for 1 person, and then link that to any number of persons that I can predict, which is the other kind of the other way of looking at multiplicative relations. We call it a functional way of looking. The eggs are a function of the number of persons. And this is what we say the more sophisticated way of proportional reasoning. But taking all of them together, and that's something we try to clarify in the book, is saying a good understanding of all of those strategies shows that you're a good proportional reasoner. I mean, you can teach an algorithm, and there are other algorithms like a cross multiplication algorithm, which are very often taught. They're algorithms. They're very hard to understand, and even many teachers or mathematicians would have a hard time explaining why they work or what they mean. So a good proportional reasoner understands all of them in a way and sees the connection between them. And in a very simple problem can go for a very straightforward, simple strategy, while in more complicated situations can go for a more advanced strategy. Yeah. And the same holds for a teacher, by the way. A good teacher should understand all of these strategies, should understand their link, and should see how one can develop into the others, so that if a student is using a more basic strategy and struggles with it, can be helped to take a step further to a more sophisticated strategy in the future.
No, that's very helpful. We're going to come back to teaching and teaching strategies in a minute. But before we get to that, I want to look at the other side of the coin, which is the errors and misconceptions that students encounter when they're struggling with the concept of proportional reasoning, or they're applying it inappropriately. Can you say more about some of those errors and misconceptions? And I'll just stop there.
Yeah, very good. In the booklet, we describe two kinds of errors that are, one of them has been documented already extensively since the 80s of the past century, which is additive reasoning. I already referred to the word additive reasoning before today, but there's a kind of additive reasoning that is wrong in proportional situations. And we know young children do that additive reasoning quite frequently in proportional situations, and it leads to a wrong solution. I'll give an example. So you have a cake for 2 persons that has 4 eggs in it. Yeah. Now we're going to make a cake for 8 persons. Yeah. That's 6 persons more. And then children will say, so the difference in the number of persons is 6, so I'll add 6 more eggs as well. So that's an addition, while you should have multiplied. If you go from 2 persons to 8 persons, you multiply by 4, so you need 4 times as many eggs, and not 6 eggs more for 6 persons more. That's additive reasoning of a kind that is wrong in a way. This doesn't lead to a correct solution to the problem or to the situation. This kind of additive reasoning we see a lot in young children. It's a kind of, well, researchers often claim this is a kind of natural development from additive to multiplicative reasoning. Latest research shows that it's not really the case, but instruction starts with addition, so that's probably an explanation. But it's the kind of mistake that we see quite a lot, and that teachers should be aware of, that children will initially, if they give a wrong answer, it can be very often brought back to this additive error. Now, what we also see is the opposite. So we see that once students learn to reason proportionally, they will start applying it in situations where it is not applicable. And interestingly, some of these situations are additive. So I'll give an example of a problem. If a child is 3 years old and his brother is 6 years old, you can say that the brother is twice as old. Yeah, you could say that. But actually, a better description is he's 3 years older. Yeah, because if that one 3-year-old becomes 12, so that's 9 years later, the brother is not twice as old anymore. He's still 3 years older. But still, some students, we've documented that in research, they will say if one child is 3, the other is 6, if the first child turns 12, the other one will be 24 years old. They often will respond that. So they reason proportionally where it is not applicable. And this is a very well documented error, and it happens typically when students get confident in proportional reasoning, when they get better in it. Other examples in probability. If you roll a die, the chance of getting a 6 is 1 out of 6. But if you roll the die twice, many people will be inclined to say your chance of getting a 6 is doubled. It is not exactly doubled. It's a bit more sophisticated than that. Or thinking, like, if you have a pizza that's 30 centimeters in diameter, and then you order another pizza that's 60 centimeters in diameter, many people will say you have twice as much pizza. That's not the case. It's 4 times as much. The area is multiplied by 4 if you double the diameter, but still it's a very deep-rooted tendency in students to think that everything doubles if you double the diameter, and so on. That's the kind of overuse of proportionality that we talk about in the book. And it's something I think teachers should be very well aware of, that it happens. It seems to happen across the world. It's not due to a specific educational system or so. It seems to happen quite broadly. Even many mathematicians make mistakes now and then in this, or big economists and so on, things like that. Yeah.
That's extremely clear. So let's talk a little bit about advice for teachers. And maybe you want to talk about this somewhat at the level of different grade levels. What are some of the strategies for teachers in helping students to develop some of these concepts, well, to develop this particular concept, but also to maybe to avoid some of these errors or misconceptions?
Yeah. There's a lot that can happen, and it all relates to what we already discussed in a way, I think. So one of the things is that we should acknowledge that young children can already do meaningful things in proportional situations. Very often nowadays, you see curricula that start teaching proportionality at the age of 10 or even later. While we know young children can already reason about relations and also multiplicative relations when they're 5, 6, 7 years old. So confronting them with those situations is already meaningful. And that doesn't mean we should always focus them on doing calculations there, but on reasoning. Reasoning about double as many people can be done at that young age, for instance. And those one-to-many correspondences and the patterns in proportional situations can be dealt with already at a much younger age, even before they know what the operation of multiplication is. They don't need that to reason about the situation. So starting early is a good point, I think. The other one is to focus on those multiple strategies to reason or to calculate in proportional situations. I already explained you can, when confronted with a proportional problem, you can deal with it in many ways. You can reason about number of persons and number of eggs, but you can also reason about the link between them. When the numbers get hard, you can go to the unit ratio or not do that, and so on. And a good mastery of all those strategies and the links between them is very valuable. And so avoiding the use of a single algorithm and always sticking to that algorithm is a very good advice, I think. Sometimes going back to very basic strategies to make sure you understand what the solution to a problem is, rather than just jumping to the algorithm all the time, is also valuable. These are, I think, important advices. Others are, for instance, relating to this overuse of proportionality. A good understanding of proportionality implies also understanding where it applies and where it does not apply. So confronting students at regular moments with situations that are not proportional at all is also good. So at some point you need to practice. You need to apply a strategy multiple times. But now and then interrupting that with a situation where that proportional algorithm or whatever you use is not applicable is very useful, because students need to be aware that this is only a model for certain situations that helps to understand certain situations, but not others. Or sometimes it's only an approximation and not an exact solution. And so showing students that this proportional model is only, like, let's say, a description of reality and of certain parts of reality and not everything, is then useful. And this often doesn't happen nowadays as well. A lot of textbooks focus on the training of the skills, the strategies, but not on focusing on where they apply, where they do not apply. A good example there is giving students 5, 6, 7 situations and let them classify them, which are proportional, which are not. and so on. It's a very different kind of mathematical tasks than the one that students are typically confronted with. And so I think this is a very important advice to give based on what we know from research.
Wim, this is an extremely helpful and clear discussion. You explain things very, very well, even to non-mathematicians like myself. It's a pleasure talking with you. This video is linked with a link to the complete booklet, and I do encourage viewers to click through and read the whole thing. It's not very long, it's very clear, and it really goes more in depth into some of the topics that we've touched on today. Thank you for your time.
Well, it was a pleasure talking to you.